This is Rumble. I'm Michael Moore, and my guest here today is Congressman Ro Khanna. And Congressman Khanna represents the 17th District in California in the I guess it's still the Bay Area, even if it's the southern part of it, what we would call Silicon Valley. And that is the area around through underneath San Jose. And do you go up on the other side of the bay there with
a little bit in Fremont and
Fremont? Sure. Oh, boy, I remember that. And back in the day, General Motors used to have a factory there.
Yeah. Oh, you're familiar with the area.
Well, I lived in the Bay Area for, welcome, by the way, to Rumble.
Thank you.
I lived in the Bay Area for almost a year back in, I don't know when this was, mid 80s. And so I lived in the Upper Haight there in San Francisco. You know where the UC Medical Center is up on the hill there on Parnassus.
Yeah.
So I lived like, two houses down from that.
So the Bay Area can claim you as one of our own.
I did spend a little bit of time there and loved it I certainly loved the whole vibe in the area. And at that time too, in the mid 80s, it was, just trying to get the president at that time to acknowledge that there was a thing called AIDS. Reagan had a different, but a similar attitude toward Trump declaring COVID over just because he said so. And Reagan was trying to declare HIV and AIDS over by just never saying the word or words. And if he doesn't say it, then we don't have it. It was weird. Do you remember this? I do
remember. It's partly why Pelosi ran for Congress. I remember, but so many problems in our country started with Reagan. I'm sure you remember the college in California basically used to be free for almost 100 years. You went to Berkeley or something, you paid $100 a year for tuition.
Just so some young people might have fallen out of their chair or bed or whatever with what you just said, that back in the day, if you went to Berkeley, it was $100 a year. If you went to UCLA, it was about $100 a year. It was essentially free. You had to pay a few fees. You might have had to pay for some books. That's it. And I think we've kept this from younger people. And it wasn't just California. All the SUNY schools in New York were free. All the, and out in the Midwest, even if you went to University of Michigan, you might have, again, I went one year. I might have paid $400, maybe. Like, how did it get to this? So yes, that was, and Reagan, if I remember right, he was the governor of California, right? And
he was the governor. He was upset at the anti-war protesters, the protesters against him. And so he really targeted the budgets of state schools and the budgets for higher education. And that's where the tuition started to increase under him. But I think, Michael, you're pointing this out is so important because it's not like we haven't had free public college before. That was actually the norm in this country until the 80s. And then in the 80s, we started all of this accumulate debt to go to college and deny people access. And that's been the anomaly. That's when we say, let's have free college and let's eliminate the $1.5 trillion of student debt people have, that's getting back to how this country used to be.
Yeah. I think the Republicans were never, they're smart, but they're not that smart to have figured out, like they all met in a room somewhere and said, what we should do is start making college cost $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 a year. And when these kids, these radicals and these causing all this trouble when they're 22 and they graduate, they're going to be in such debt. They'll stop all this radical politics, activism stuff because they're going to have to get a job because they've got now loans that have accumulated into the tens of thousands of dollars. And I thought, wow, what a genius way to tamp down young people and their desire to fight the system, to act on their legitimate rage as to how the world is being run.
It's brilliant. I've never thought of it that way, but it's actually a brilliant point. Because in law school, and look at my story, I had to take $100,000 of loans, and I ended up spending a couple of years at a corporate law firm before going into public service, as did many people. And the large reality was because you had to pay off your loans. But imagine, and I was able to do it. I've been fortunate in life, but there are a lot of people who want to go into public service. In fact, like the whole class at these law schools or other places wants to do that, and then they don't end up going to the NAACP or Human Rights Watch or working to change things because of their debt, literally their student debt. So you're absolutely right. It's probably had a huge dampening effect on student activism.
Not just on activism, but imagine I wasn't planning on talking about this, but if I stop for a second and think about what you just said, like you had to start paying off that loan, $100,000 loan to go to law school. So you're going to take the first job it's going to pay you a decent wage to start paying off this loan. If you didn't have the loan, you might just wait and find the kind of firm or maybe the kind of nonprofit or work for the ACLU or whatever it is you might have wanted to do in your dreams as a 22-year-old or as a 25-year-old, you couldn't do. And it makes me wonder now how we have maybe suffered as a society because, like, what great invention did we not get to avail ourselves of because some creative, smart science student had to just go get a job? Or what cure for what disease or cancer or anything got lost because somebody who got themselves through medical school or whatever had to just get to work to pay off that loan. The loan was the ball and chain that prevented them and prevented us. We're the ones who suffer as a society when young people aren't able to do the things that where their dreams would take them that might actually benefit the rest of us. And when I was that age, I mean, in my day, at that age, when you see in the school, college was virtually free. You graduated from college. What you do is you go get a Eurail pass. It was like $100, $200, and travel all around Europe for the summer for $200. That's what you did. You went and explored. You saw the world. You got to think a little bit. And maybe write some poems.
Yeah, the question is how many, it's one thing to say, okay, William Faulkner or Toni Morrison they're willing to not make that much money and still write great books. But when you're in actual debt, it's a different calculation. And when you look at all the people of my generation, many who are idealistic, but who end up either in corporate law firms or McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or Wall Street, one explanation is, okay, is it more materialistic? I think that's too simplistic. I think the student debt has had a lot to do with people not going as much into the arts, into the humanities, into nonprofits, into starting their own businesses, into being entrepreneurs. I mean, it's probably had a really dampening effect on our creativity and even our innovation.
So we've won the White House. Yay. We have held the House of Representatives still in the Democrats' hands, the majority of the House. And if we win these 2 Georgia Senate seats, and there's an excellent chance we can do this, the polls right now already show that the 2 Democrats that are running, one is ahead in one of the races, one's ahead of the Republican. In the other race, it's tied. This is doable. So if we have the White House, we've got the House, and we end up with the Senate, then I say, let's make America California again. Let's make America California. And I thought what might be a good idea today is to our audience to hear from you how California has benefited from being all Democratic in terms of the governor's chair, the Senate, and the Assembly, which we call the House in most states. How have you gotten away with this? What has been the benefit for the people?
Yep.
Here's what can happen if we have the Senate and the House and the White House, and we don't have to, like Obama had to through 6 of his 8 years, suffer through all the blockage from the Republican Party. And after Obamacare got very little through a Senate and a House at that time that decided to block him. So Ro Khanna, 17th District Congressman from California.
First of all, I like how you're framing it, because it's not about the personality of electing Joe Biden or even Kamala Harris, who's a Californian. It's about getting the team in there, the infrastructure to finally bring some of these changes. Now, in fairness, the person who gets the credit for the top 2 system, as well as the independent redistricting, which is that in California, politicians can't draw their own lines. of their districts, which has made a big difference. It was
Wow.
actually Arnold Schwarzenegger who initiated ballot measures. Both parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, were opposed to this. You can see why, because Dianne Feinstein didn't want to be facing a Democrat challenger in a November general election. So the top two system makes it less incumbent friendly and allows a progressive challenger to emerge. But it turns out that California voters overwhelmingly in the ballot measures liked both of these initiatives, and they passed in the early around 2010, 2012. And that really changed California politics. That was one of the things that allowed more women, more minorities, more newcomers, more progressives to start winning. And it ended up helping Democrats. I mean, we have of the 53 seats, I think we control 46 seats in the House, and both
in the U.S. House,
the U.S. House,
yeah,
and in the Assembly and the Senate, the state Senate, we have huge majorities. So how has it mattered? Let me give you one concrete example. The initiative for racial justice, where we want to take measures against police violence. We're one of the only countries of Western democracies that has a standard of force that is what William Rehnquist said, that police officers can use force if they think it's reasonable. If they think someone is pulling a gun, even if it turns out to be a toy, if the police officer thought it's reasonable under our law, it's allowed for them to use force. Well, California passed a law saying let's get into the same standard as every other Western democracy, that force needs to be an absolute last resort. It's not about what a police officer thinks it's reasonable. If you can't show that you've exhausted every other alternative to get it done, to prevent violence, you can't use force. That passed the Assembly. It passed the Senate. Gavin Newsom signed it. We are still stuck in that kind of reform. It's in the Justice and Policing Act that Karen Bass did a great job in. It's passed the House. The Senate hasn't moved it. The White House hasn't moved it. If the Senate is flipped within a first 2 months, that would become law. Second thing in California is environmental standards. I mean, you look at the standards, the aggressive standards that we've initiated, where in the next, by 2030, we're supposed to be at about 60% renewable energy. Now, I mean, obviously, some of the Green New Deal and other aspects are even more ambitious. But even if the country became California standards, we would make tremendous progress towards the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change report is to decarbonize the economy by 2050. And that's something that passed under Jerry Brown with a majority in the Assembly and the Senate. I could keep going, but I don't want to.
I want you to keep, because the more I listen to this, I think the title of this episode should be "Make America California Again." Or we haven't really ever been California, but you're right. Just when you just said those words, if the rest of the country just adopted this limited thing that California has done in terms of CO2 emissions, that imagine how much better off we would be. And I start to think just these few things you've mentioned, and I want to hear more of what California has done, because it makes sense to me that if you guys out there are creating the template for us to follow, that's okay by me. No offense to the Midwest where I'm from. We live a different way. It's a slower pace, but that's a good thing too, by the way.
Yeah, we can learn things too. I mean, it's not. It needs to be in partnership. But here's the thing with California that I think is the total misconception that the Ted Cruzes and all have. They said, "Oh, everyone's leaving California, and California is bankrupting its economy." Give me a break. I mean, we're responsible for 15% of the GDP of the country, far more than Texas, more than any other state by far. You've got both in Silicon Valley. I mean, whatever you think of these companies, they're driving most of the economic growth of the country. And so someone should just pause and think, okay, if California is able to do all these progressive things and still have a $3 trillion economy which is probably the sixth or seventh largest in the world measured on its own, still is giving birth to Silicon Valley and innovation, then maybe these progressive policies aren't actually opposed to economic growth. Maybe having more immigrants in your society is actually a good thing for job creation and economic growth. Maybe investing in community colleges. We've had a bill that's passed to say we're going to invest and make community college free. Now, I think it should be, let's get all of college free. And this is where I think let's look at what built California, right? I mean, the fact that you had UC Berkeley and that was accessible, the fact that you had the community colleges and state universities that were free. I think that's partly what gave rise to things like Silicon Valley. And we need to go back to having that kind of educational excellence. These are common sense things that I think would be good for the country.
What's interesting listening to you now, so you represent the area where Google headquarters is, where Apple headquarters is. I assume Facebook is there also.
Right, yeah, right? 5 miles away. Yeah.
Okay, so now I have to say, being from the Michigan, Detroit, Flint area, that whatever General Motors and Ford wanted, they got, and including they got it from Democrats in Congress. The Democratic representatives from the Detroit and Flint and other areas that had auto factories, they did the things that General Motors wanted them to do, such as don't put these emission controls on our cars. You know, it costs the company money. They were very, as Democrats, active in supporting what the corporate people wanted. I've observed you from afar, and I've always thought it interesting that you, the congressman who represents the area where the headquarters of these massive behemoth, the General Motors of our era in the 21st century are, but you don't necessarily do what you're not at their beck and call. How does that work? Because these are some powerful people, and you're the representative in Congress representing that area.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. The highest compliment I ever got on Bernie's campaign was saying that my decision to support him was actually a tougher decision given the district that I represented. And then it turns out that Bernie Sanders carried my district, carried the district with Apple and Google. And people say, how is this? Let me say a couple reasons why. First, the regulation that's most needed of these tech companies is just like regulation that was needed on GM or the auto companies may have been on emissions, is a regulation on data. And people say, well, why does that matter? It matters because a lot of the extremism or violence that's being perpetrated on social media sites is by collecting people's data and then targeting folks with joining particular extremist groups or hate groups. I mean, QAnon spread on Facebook because Facebook had profiles. You weren't probably getting, Michael, requests to join a QAnon group or weren't getting requests to join
I was not.
White supremacist group. It was very targeted. And suddenly people who were in communities where they would have been fringe have suddenly been connected with thousands of people. So I came up with Tim Berners-Lee, who was one of the founders of the internet, the World Wide Web, with an Internet Bill of Rights, starting with the premise that consumers should have control over their own data and not be manipulated by these platforms. But the second reason why Bernie Sanders in particular resonated is there are a lot of workers in these places. I mean, who's actually driving the buses? Who's serving the food? Who's cleaning the buildings? They're all voters in my district. There are probably more of them than there are the tech executives.
So are you implying that Mark Zuckerberg gets only one vote, and that the janitorial workforce at Facebook, which could number maybe 1,000 people, they each get one vote? And
that is exactly right. And
is that fair, though, Ro? Is that really fair that Mark only gets one vote, considering what he's given us, how he's
well, unfortunately, I think Mark gets a lot of influence from his Facebook platform, so he probably has more influence than one vote, but it's still not enough to fear him. And the big thing that tech gets away with is they go to Congress, and then the biggest fear members of Congress have is they don't want to look like Luddites. They don't want to look out of touch. They don't want to look like they don't get the future. And so they're reluctant to push back. And so tech just gets away with not being challenged in some of these ways. I mean, consider the basic idea of independent contractors or employees. I love the fact, great, Uber made an app development that allows you to hail a ride wherever you are. That's great. What does that have to do with treating someone like an employee, giving them healthcare benefits and paying them a fair wage? And then they come up and they say, oh, but we need them to work part-time. Give me a break. I had a privileged job of getting to be a lecturer at Stanford. I used to go in and work 4 hours, teach 2 courses a week, and I was a lecturer. That's part-time. I got to set my own schedule. Guess what? I still was considered an employee. I still got healthcare benefits. Right. So the idea that it's not innovation to treat workers poorly. And you look at the basic fact, Michael, which is from 1938 in this country to 1968, the minimum wage kept increasing with productivity. If that trend had continued, if workers were actually getting what they were producing, if the janitors and the bus drivers were getting what they were contributing to the economy, the wage today would be $24 an hour. But they haven't gotten what they deserve. And that issue is front and center in my district. And why have so many working families been left out?
Ro, I tell you, I'm reading in the paper, I'm seeing it online. People tell both my sisters live in California, so I hear all these things that California has just passed this bill. California has just made this happen. What was the thing I saw yesterday? Of course, the whole country has Obamacare, but part of Obamacare was to also, provide for mental health. Well, California does that. California made sure the insurance companies have to cover mental health, not just physical health, but mental health. And I go, how come we don't have that? How come we don't have that in all 50 states? But you see, when all the power is in the hands of the Democrats, like it is in California, and like I pray to God, it soon will be here nationwide. You'd mentioned earlier, like the gig economy and how many, they've got to be considered employees so they get the benefits. But I think, didn't California itself pass some sort of law to start protecting the workers in our new gig economy? Didn't that also, am I right in thinking that? Or
You're absolutely right. They passed it. It's passed the legislature. It's the law. And guess what? $220 million this election as we speak by Uber and Lyft to try to overturn that law in California by a ballot initiative.
Oh, really? Wow.
But this is why we need federal legislation or privacy legislation. I mean, can you imagine, Michael, that we have no federal privacy legislation in this country? I mean, we invented a lot of the technology, and it's Europe that's driving the regulations. Now, California has a privacy law, but it's non-enforceable. I mean, you just have an attorney general that's doing it, but it has some of the good aspects to it. So why can't you do a federal privacy legislation across the country? That's something we could do. I mentioned what we could do on police violence. I mentioned what we could do on climate change. I mean, just getting to California's standard would help. What California has done on education in terms of higher education would be a good step. We need to do more than what California is doing on K through 12 and early childhood education. We need to look at probably Jerry Brown's father, Pat Brown, and that California in terms of the investment. But now that we have all the branches, California is trying more investment, and that's something the federal government can do. And here's the big difference, right? And California still has to balance its budget because that's how it's governed. And in the federal government, we don't have that same restraint. So you could take California's values and say, look, we're actually going to invest in people and not have the same constraints of having to balance the budget. The Republicans have never cared. I mean, since 1980, Michael, here's what I don't understand. Here's been the Republican playbook. We're going to cut your taxes and we're going to increase defense. And magically, this is going to create 5% growth. And that 5% growth is going to take care of any budget deficits. Of course, the budget deficits keep going up and up. Why don't we just say we're going to invest in people's healthcare and we're going to invest in education and we're going to invest in infrastructure, and this is going to actually create 4 or 5% growth, and this is going to pay for itself. Instead, we get caught up talking about deficits, and they never do, and they run the same playbook again and again.
It makes, it's, I hope people listening to this are hearing what you're saying. It's a $3 trillion economy in just California. If California was its own country, as you said, it would be like number 6 or 7 in terms of its GDP. And with the Democrats in charge, instead of everything going to hell in a handbasket, the opposite has occurred. Because I remember when the Republicans were in there, they were having to deal with so much debt and deficit, and because they had to balance the budget, there was a lot of chaos, 20 some years ago in California. The chaos seems to now not only be gone, and it's not that everything's perfect. This is not nirvana out there, but the corporations and the wealthy are taxed, and those taxes pay for this laundry list that you've been going through here in terms of whether it's, paying for education the way it should be paid for. And again, it's not enough, as you said. But what are some other examples of how California has used its resources, has used its tax base to improve the lives of the citizens of California?
Public transportation. I mean, we've really invested in electric trains, in infrastructure of public transportation in the Bay Area, in BART, in Caltrain. That has made a significant difference. We have invested in providing everyone with basic nutrition and food. So through CalFresh. So if you're a family and you're struggling and you can't get good nutrition, the view in California and in California schools is better to get young kids and families food so that they have adequate nutrition and can be productive than having them not be healthy. We're pushing towards getting a single payer system in healthcare. It's passed the Assembly. The Gavin Newsom ran on it. And if you look at Canada, the Medicare for All single payer started in Saskatchewan, the province of Saskatchewan. So California, there could be a model, and it's something that the federal government can look at in terms of how we expand. The early childhood education, the focus in California on understanding that young kids between 0 and 3, that their development is essential, and putting that investment in there, that's something which we can do at a federal level. In fact, the famous study by James Henkman, who was a Nobel laureate economist, was done in Michigan, Michael, which showed that poor African American community, where you had intensive investment in early childhood education between the ages of 0 and 5, yielded huge results in the change their lives.
Right.
And so, that's something California is prioritizing.
So you're spending your money on these things. And I assume there's still a few Republicans around that don't like what's going on. But nonetheless, it seems like the people of California like these things. It's nice to have mass transit that works. New Yorkers, are you listening? And how this idea could spread across the country. How Detroit could be building not polluting cars only, internal combustion engines, but mass transit, things that, real transportation things that don't kill the planet as much as the automobile does. We could be building those things in Flint and Detroit and providing jobs, for people. But somebody's got to get the ball rolling. Somebody's got to light the spark. Somebody's got to have the idea. And we have the situation here. If we paid more attention to California, I just have started to say, well, people say, well, how should we do? Should we fix this problem? I don't know. What's California doing? I've just started to say this. And I again, like I said, I lived there for a year, but I don't want to live there. I don't want to, I don't like the idea of watching football on Sunday at 9 a.m. He's just like,
one of the things California needs to do better, because a lot of Michigan, the automakers now have a presence in Silicon Valley, because even the automobile is basically becoming a computerized vehicle. But one of the things we have to do better is, when you had manufacturing in this country, you didn't just have manufacturing in Michigan. or in Cleveland. You had manufacturing in many different parts of the country. And a lot of places were connected to manufacturing. So if you were a energy producing town, you benefited when manufacturing succeeded. If you were a transportation or railroad town, you benefited when manufacturing succeeded. One of the challenges with the digital economy has been that the wealth creation has been very concentrated. When Silicon Valley creates all this wealth, it doesn't really translate into a Black community in the South creating wealth, or in Michigan or Ohio, a community creating wealth. And I really think one of our challenges is how do we distribute wealth creation and jobs in a digital age where you don't actually have all these jobs in Boston, Austin, or Silicon Valley, and you can prepare people for more of these jobs. And if we do that, because everyone doesn't want to live in Santa Clara or Palo Alto for a host of reasons. You want people to be able to live in the communities they grew up in, but have access to these new jobs. And that's something I think that we could figure out if we get all three branches or both chambers and the White House.
If you remember Obama's first 2 years, he had the House and the Senate. He had, there were independents who caucused with the Democrats and gave him the majority. But, if you remember, Obama is such a nice guy. If you read his books, he's always trying to calm people down. And, he talked about, when he was in college and he walked in the law review and he's the Black guy in the room and everybody's starting to get a little nervous. And his first thought is, I got to just calm the white people down. They don't need to be afraid of me. And he governed like that. The first couple of years, it was like, let's just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Whereas on the night of his inauguration, McConnell and all the Republicans, they had a dinner somewhere there in D.C. They all went out to dinner and decided this is how we're going to stop him. We're going to just block everything. And so he got Obamacare through. He got a couple things through. But after that, after the Tea Party came in 2010, and they took back, they took back the House and they took back the Senate. And then he didn't have what he needed to get anything really substantive through. And so, so what's good about what's good about this happening where we control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And I say again, we, because we are not Joe Biden, but we are also the squad. And, the squad, these 4 women, this is now being increased by double or triple due to this election. So there's going to be more of a progressive voice, and you're in the progressive caucus there, so this.
Yeah, no, it's been incredible. I mean, the energy that, first of all, the profile they built and the voice they've had is, people forget they're freshman members of Congress. I mean, the idea in freshman members of Congress was don't be heard, and they have more of a following probably than almost anyone in Congress, and they have they have expanded the agenda in very bold ways, and then they're going to be joined by Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and Mondaire Jones and we're going to have a vibrant progressive caucus that's going to be pushing the envelope on getting us out of bad wars, on providing free public college, on canceling student debt that's hurting working families, on having a bold vision for climate change, on getting at least a $15 livable wage, on strengthening unions, on having real reform in the laws so that we don't have police violence, on having massive investments in public health. This is going to be the agenda. And frankly, we need a lot more than just 2 years of Democrats in the House and Senate and the White House to get this done. I think the mistake would be if we don't do a bold agenda. Christina Romer and Paul Krugman and others were right that Obama needed twice the stimulus, and Rahm Emanuel was just flat out wrong. And while I credit Obama for getting what he did, part of the reason that people felt left out is that the stimulus and what we did wasn't enough. And we can't repeat that mistake now. We have to really rise to the crisis we're in.
The fact that it wasn't enough was one of the things that contributed to it really took to about 2017 to pull out of the crash of '08. It took many more years than it needed to. And when COVID-19 began, I think people had the right idea. We need to put money in people's pockets because they're not going to make it, and they will spend that money, and that will keep people working. That idea was a good idea a number of months ago, and now, of course, it's gone. But I mean, how does California handle a situation like this in terms of having that safety net, of having that cushion for when something happens like this? And you have your own natural disasters taking place there with the fires and other things that happen in California. So tell us how just help us, put us in that California state of mind.
Sure. Well, California has, of course, puts a lot of investment in our firefighters, in public health, in our public agencies, and to the extent we can, we provide generous assistance in terms of our unemployment comparatively to other states. But the reality is California is hurting because we do have to have a balanced budget by law, and we're $50 billion in the hole. And this is why we really need the federal government to step up with giving money to states and local governments. I mean, states simply, even if you're California, you simply cannot on your own handle a crisis because you don't have the ability to print money and you don't have the ability to deficit spend. And the businesses are shutting down in our area, and people, even though we have a rent moratorium, that their debts are piling up. And it's because of the inaction of this White House. Now, here's the difference, actually. It's a classic difference between McConnell and Democrats. So you mentioned when Obama came into power, McConnell said, we're not going to do anything. We're going to obstruct. So Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats 5 months ago passed a $3 trillion stimulus bill, and we were begging the White House to take it. And the irony is that would have probably, in my view, been the biggest benefit to Donald Trump. I mean, he would have literally had his signature go out on those stimulus checks, and he would have gotten $3 trillion he could claim credit for. And the Democrats just had such a sense of we've got to do what the right thing is. That the speaker was literally begging the White House to do it. And he couldn't get McConnell, he couldn't get his own party on board with doing something that was in his own self-interest.
Can you paint a picture for us, Ro, of what we could actually accomplish? And I'm not asking you to just talk about the Biden-Harris platform, but because I think my sense is that the people are a few steps ahead of that platform. And, every poll was showing back during the primaries that even when they polled Democrats coming out of the polling places in Mississippi and Alabama in the Democratic primaries, when they asked about Medicare for all, the voters said, yes, I want that. And I noticed like the next week they changed the question because they thought, okay, no, they got to understand. So the next time they asked the question coming out of the polls, it was, how do you feel about the government controlling and paying for your health care? and it's still, the majority still wanted it. They still wanted what we call Medicare for all, or what I call the Canadian system. That's just walk me through. We've got a Democratic Senate. We've got a Democratic House. We've got more progressives. We've got the squad has increased. All of this is, and we've got Joe Biden, who is not an ideologue, and I think can be spoken to.
I agree with that.
Do you agree with that?
I do. I think the way he dealt with Bernie Sanders and courted him and has solicited his opinion, it's actually what developed the most respect for Joe Biden. I mean, obviously I criticized certain things in the primary, but he has an ability to build a coalition, and it's not lip service. He really does seek to get people's input. And I think people around Bernie and Bernie himself felt very fairly treated and valued, and which makes me think that this is a Joe Biden who will be cognizant of the mistakes that were made in the past and understands where the energy is. He's a very good politician. He's astute, and is going to want to cement that legacy. And so I do think he's open to listening to progressive ideas.
Okay, so we have a president who will listen. We have a president who I've met him a few times. He is what Bernie says is right. He is a decent guy. He has a heart. He did grow up in the working class, and he hasn't forgotten it. And so I'm hopeful that if he's not with us on some of these things that we were trying to put forth here with Bernie's campaign, paint the picture for me: Democratic Senate, Democratic House, the Democrat in the White House. What are some of the things we can possibly get through and bills signed in the next year or 2 or 3 or 4? What? Just give me, and I'm not asking you to throw candy out to the voters here, but I think if people are still trying to search for a reason, why do I want to be involved in this? Politics is corrupt. It's all a bunch of hooey. I think that I wanted to have you on today because as a Californian, as a member of Congress, but as a Californian, you've been you've had a front row seat to how California has become a better state, because the Democratic Party, with all of its flaws and all of its, whatever shortcomings, whatever you want to call it, has pushed forward and made life a bit better for the average person. And if I'm wrong about that, say so. But you've just told us all these things that have been improved since the Democrats took control. Now imagine
immigration is a huge thing, because this is why Pete Wilson in many ways is the Donald Trump of his time on a statewide basis. He ran on an anti-Latino agenda, saying that we should not give any services, including public schools, to people who are undocumented. And there was such a backlash against him. That's really what led to Democrats sweeping across the state. I mean, this is not a state that hates immigrants. And it's turned out that we, by and large, do not have a huge problem when it comes to people getting along and working together and realizing that everyone's going to benefit. Let me just one detailed example, but it's worth mentioning. In the 1960s, California, which did have somewhat of an anti-immigrant sentiment, said we're going to stop farm workers from coming in from Mexico and other places because we think they're taking jobs of native Californians. Well, it turns out a year later or so, the policy was overturned, because when they stopped the farmers from coming in, it wasn't Californians that got the jobs. The jobs just got automated. And what ended up happening is California lost all of that tax revenue, and they lost all of the money that the undocumented were spending in the economy. So it was turned out to be a disastrous policy. And California realized that actually having immigrants that were productive was going to do more for California's economy. And I think that sentiment is a real key to some of California's success.
Before we go any further with the congressman here, if you don't mind, I just need to acknowledge our underwriter who supports this podcast. They're called ExpressVPN. And now you've heard me talk about them, those of you listening to me, as one of our great underwriters here, willing to stand with us in what we do here in Rumble. I've talked to you about how good they are about, protecting your security and your privacy online and all that, working at keeping the NSA out of your phone calls and your text and your business. Well, there's another reason I want to tell you why it's also good to have Express VPN, and it's pretty cool. And I don't know, I asked them, am I going to get in trouble for telling the public this? They said, no, it's all legit. I'm saying, wow, because man, I have had this problem, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. Okay, so everybody, that if you've got Netflix or YouTube, or everybody's got YouTube, right? Hulu, or any other streaming channels, they'll only show you the movies and TV shows that are available in the country you're in, right? You've seen those things that come up. You're in the wrong country. You're in the wrong region, right? Okay. But if you have ExpressVPN on your devices, this lets you change your online location. Why am I lowering my voice? Because I think we're getting away with something here we shouldn't be able to. No, seriously. If you have ExpressVPN, it lets you change your online location so you can control where you want the sites to think you're located. where you want them to think you're someplace else. So something comes up and it says, oh, this is only available in Canada. Well, by using your ExpressVPN, you are suddenly, magically, in Canada or India or France. Where do you want to be from today? I want to be from wherever I can watch this goddamn movie. Okay, well, ExpressVPN allows you to change countries and unblock thousands of new shows and movies that you should have the right to see. So let's say you're sitting out there somewhere in New Jersey or Kansas or whatever, and you want to watch the new Doctor Who that's not here yet in the US. You want to watch Doctor Who on UK Netflix. Well, guess what? Hit the button, and all of a sudden, you're in Liverpool. All right? You want to watch something that's only on Australian Netflix? Boom. Hello, you're in Sydney. All of us, or how about some cool Japanese anime? Okay? I can put you in Tokyo just with a push of the button here using your ExpressVPN. This works with any streaming service, Hulu, BBC iPlayer, Netflix, YouTube, you name it. So here's a special deal for all our Rumble listeners. Just go to ExpressVPN, that's V as in Victor, P as in Paul, N as in Nancy, expressvpn.com and then /Rumble. You got to type that in, /Rumble. expressvpn.com/Rumble to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free when you sign up. That's expressvpn.com/Rumble. Thank you for being our underwriter and supporting us in what we do. And thank you for letting me live in Liverpool, even if just for a day. Okay, now back to our congressman here and back to this idea, back to our idea of making America, California again. Money. Now, America.
Yes.
The federal government, Democrat in the White House, Democratic Senate, Democratic House. Walk us through, beginning in the first month or two, what starts to happen in our Congress. What bills start to make their way to the president's desk? Paint that. You're there. You must have a personal triage list of an agenda of what you'd like to see happen, as do other Democrats. What's this look like? Tell us if this happens.
I'll tell you what I think will happen, not just what my wish list is, but what I think actually will happen. I think within the first month, you will have a massive stimulus bill, $3 to $4 trillion stimulus bill that will be retroactive, where people will get some help in terms of stimulus. I mean, some of us have proposed $2,000 a month. I don't know whether we'll get quite $2,000 a month and whether it'll be for 4 or 5 months, but you will get some significant stimulus beyond one check to help with all of the expenses given this COVID crisis. You will get help.
So right now, I'm telling you right now, thousands of people listening to you say that are going from your lips to God's ears. Seriously. I mean, do you know how hard it is right now for people trying to make it, not knowing if they're going to get evicted or have their mortgage foreclosed? And
the money, when we get the Fed printing money, or when money is going to lend to corporations or to banks, no one ever says, how are we getting that money? It's mind-boggling to me why we can't get money into the hands of people who are actually going to spend it on groceries, spend it on their rent or their mortgage. And we've totally forsaken folks. That has been the issue, right? The issue wasn't that we had shutdowns to keep people safe. The issue is that the government asked people to shut down to keep people safe and then didn't do anything. So we're saying you can't make a living, and then we're not giving you any compensation to make ends meet. That was the real crime against working families, and we should have been giving $2,000 a month from March.
This is going to happen probably right away.
This will happen, and this is not just the Progressive Caucus. This is the broader House Democratic Caucus that will do this. And now, how much it's going to be and how many months, that will be negotiated. But people will get some relief, and they're going to get some relief on paying their rent and their mortgages, and that's going to be direct money in people's pockets.
Okay, so that's the economic side of the pandemic. What will these two houses and the White House that are in the hands of one party, what will that party and its representatives, our representatives, do to fight this virus, to somehow save lives? Because this is crazy now that Dr. Fauci told us months ago we must never get to what he called the apocalyptic number of 100,000 new cases a day, and now here we are.
Let me say a few things which may sound obvious, but will make a huge difference. When people say, okay, we're going to listen to science, it's not just rhetoric. I'll give you a real concrete example because it came out of University of California, San Francisco. There was a study done on mask wearing. Forget making the argument that masks is about the social good. Masks is actually in your self-interest. The study found that not only did masks significantly decrease your chances of getting COVID, here was the kicker. If you did get COVID and you were wearing a mask, the amount of inoculum you got made it highly likely that you would be asymptomatic because you were only going to get a little bit of inoculum. So if we have a White House and a Senate and a House talking about why it's in people's self-interest to wear masks and that this is not some communitarianism or some altruism, this is actually what the scientists are telling you is going to keep you and your family safe, I think that will make a difference. I know people say, oh, what's the plan? That leadership matters. What leaders do matter. Now, beyond that, there are things that we will get done. First is having contact tracing. We probably need 300,000 people to do contact tracing. I mean, my guess is, and you may not even know this, that there's an app that Google and Apple have created, which allows people to do contact tracing. The irony is, even though these are U.S. companies, that app is being used by like 33 or 40% of people in Ireland, 25% of people in Germany, and here no one even knows about it. It hasn't been used.
Wow.
Why is that? Why can't we get basic contact tracing either through apps or through hiring people to do that? You know what the tragedy of this crisis is, Michael? There's certain things that are really complex, right? But getting a vaccine for this, that's really complex. But the point is, this was so simple in some ways. If he had just come, I actually think he would have had a landslide re-election if he had just stood up in front of the American people in March and said, here's what we need to do. We all need to wear masks because this is what the study is saying. And he keeps blaming Fauci and stuff. So Fauci and all, they didn't want people to panic and get those masks when we were in a crisis and you needed them for healthcare workers. But once they came in and said the data shows that we need masks, if he had said we need masks, and he said, and we need to make sure that we're contact tracing and figuring out what the source of the virus is, we would have probably been able to reduce the death rate at least fourfold if you look at what other countries have done. And that's what I think is such an indictment on American governance. I mean, you're talking about American exceptionalism, American democracy. The fact that we couldn't get our institutions to do such simple things. And this is a place where I will brag about California and the Bay Area, because Sarah Cody in my district in public health, turns out she was married to someone at Stanford, an epidemiologist. She was one of the first people in the country to say, let's lock down. And Newsom did it 4 days after that. It was weeks before New York and other states did it. And it's one of the reasons that the death rate hasn't been nearly as high. And you look at San Francisco or the Bay Area and look at the amount of fatalities, look at the amount of people infected. And it's been totally different than
I noticed because, of course, I decided I was working in New York when the lockdown happened. And so I didn't get back to Michigan. And man, I lived through that. 1 out of every 300 New Yorkers died during that time. And during that time, there was a story in the news that the mayor of San Francisco, she actually started the San Francisco lockdown before Gavin Newsom did it a few days or a week later for the state. 4 days apart. But it was like there was a point there in the first month or two, the total number of deaths in San Francisco was like 8. It was 8 an hour here.
In coordination with 6 counties, Santa Clara, Alameda County, and it was largely at Dr. Sarah Cody. I mean, she really should be a hero. Her story is not told enough, but it was largely at her direction because she had someone she knew, an epidemiologist, who was telling her every hour you wait is going to make this problem exponentially worse. Well, having Biden in there and being someone who listens, I know he's not going to disregard actual scientists when they're telling him what the problem is. So taking just these basic measures of having a a president and a Senate and a House which are on the same page, and having contact tracing, using these apps that our country developed, but every other country in the world is taking advantage of, that would go a long way. And then, of course, once we get a vaccine, making sure that it's equitably distributed, that it's actually getting to communities. And this is something which
it's safe.
And it's safe.
Okay, so the Democrats completely in charge the first few weeks, as you said, now with COVID, which I think is number one on everyone's mind, that there are going to be measures taken to fight this and to reduce the number of cases and deaths. Science will be trusted, and there will be such a massive stimulus bill passed and signed, so that people do not have to feel like they're going to end up out on the curb, and that they can get through this. That's going to happen right away. But now I asked you, let's go back to the drawing board. I want you to continue to paint that picture of what's going to happen, because we won't have to try to convince Republicans to come into the 20th century or to have a heart or whatever. We're just going to pass this stuff and Biden is going to sign it or some version of it. What else? What else is let people know that if our federal government is more like California's, where the Democrats control all three seats here, what's going to happen?
Well, then I think you're going to start to see some of the best legislation on workers' rights that we've seen in decades. And that's because I think Joe Biden actually has a very progressive platform. If you go to his platform on this issue of workers' rights, you're going to get legislation that says we need a $15 minimum wage, which is not just for people making minimum wage. That's going to have a effect up the income scale, where people are finally going to start to get pay raises. You're going to see an expansion of the earned income tax credit, which may seem technical, but basically that means if you're making 50, 60, 70 grand, you're going to get a tax credit money back from the federal government of $5,000, $6,000, which is going to be a direct raise for you in your pocketbooks. You're going to see the proper classification of employees. So if you're in a job where you're an independent contractor and not getting health care or child care benefits where everyone else is, you're going to be properly classified. You're going to see card check, which means you can join a union without having the retaliatory campaigns of the employer and laws against retaliation. You're going to see a fundamental worker bill of rights, which means that people are going to get child care. They're going to be treated fairly and safely. I mean, right now in some places, Amazon fulfillment centers, I order Amazon, other people do too, but people are being treated like sardines packed in these Amazon warehouses. No sense of any precautions that need to be taken, PPE that needs to be provided. All of that will be changed. So I think you will have in the first, I would say even the first 3 months, very pro-worker legislation pass.
Wow, that is such, at a time when it seemed like unions were going to just completely die. If that could turn around, that would be such an important thing. Okay, so workers' rights, unions, etc. If you're a working class person, there's going to be an increase in the minimum wage. There's going to be a living wage. And $15 at some point may no longer be enough to call that a living wage. But for now, you think that will pass. We'll have an increase in our minimum wage.
Yeah, and the reason I say these things will pass is some of these things have already passed out of the House. They've just been stalled because we don't have the Senate or the White House. So if we've already passed it in the House and we're only going to get a more progressive House, that means that the legislation is only going to get better. And if we have the Senate, and that means that's actually going to become law.
Okay, what other ways can we turn into Californians here? What about the free community college? Do you think that's going to happen? Well, there
are two places I think that it will happen. I think free community college will happen because that was something that even Obama, towards the end of his term, supported. So I could see Biden getting behind that. And I think while he's probably not at free public college or free vocational training for everyone, as the progressive wing is behind, I could see him saying, at least for working and middle class families, that should be free. And that was a compromise bill that Bernie actually introduced right after 2016. I could see that getting support and actually passing. And then, Biden has actually been pretty good on student debt relief. And he had a provision of $10,000 cancellation of student debt in one of the early stimulus bills that got stripped out through the entire legislative process. But I could see him prioritizing getting some relief to people with student debt.
Wow, that would be great.
Not just for the 47 million. Here's what people forget. Those 47 million often have spouses and kids and family whose entire lives are changed because of that debt. So it's an issue that affects probably 100 million people.
Wow, right. What about marijuana? Can we go California on that? At the very least, can we see the law changed in this country so that nobody's going to prison because they possess marijuana?
Well, I've been, Michael, one of the earliest advocates of legalization of marijuana. I think it's a no-brainer. Legalization and getting it off Schedule C is a bit of a tougher lift with some of the just bluntly older members of Congress. Now, maybe there will be a change, but some of the previous generation have been somewhat resistant to that. But what you're saying in terms of decriminalization, I think that can absolutely get
at the very least, yes.
At the very least, and that can get through a lot on racial justice lines. I mean, we know that if you smoke a joint in a suburban public high school, you're probably not going to end up in jail. Versus if you do it in a community that's largely Black or Latino, it could ruin your life because you get an arrest record and all the consequences. So having decriminalization, having expungement of arrest records, having moves against mandatory minimums for drug offenses, all of that I think is something that will get passed, and eventually legalization will get passed. What we have in California, but that's going to take some time.
What about the environment? What is going to happen in this first session of Congress under the all Democratic, 24/7 Democratic government here?
Eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, which is going to go a long way in creating a basic level playing field. Have massive investments in solar and in wind, in battery storage, and in building design that's going to have 21st century economy, green energy economy, and us leading. And I see a massive push in a bill that will pass, and having some price on carbon, not for working families, but for the big corporations that will incentivize some of these corporations to start diversifying their economy. I think he will look at what needs to be done and start creating these new jobs.
Paris Climate Accords. What about?
Well, we'll be back in that.
Yeah, right away, right?
Right away.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that needs Congress. I mean, I don't know if it needs the Senate or not, but I think Biden can just get back in there.
But I'm sorry to have to point this out again. This is another California idea, because once Trump pulled out of Paris, the California, Gavin Newsom, you guys just immediately said, well, we are essentially the 6th largest economy in the world, so we're going to have our own. We're not pulling out of the Paris Accords. We're still going to follow the Paris Accords. I thought that was so cool to hear that.
No, I appreciate you pointing that out. And it's one of the reasons Trump unfairly brags about environmental statistics that don't look as bad. I mean, even though he's tried everything to damage it, because it turns out most of the country said, we're going to just continue to do our best to comply on state and local levels. But now you're going to actually have a federal government that's a partner as opposed to someone trying to sabotage it.
With the Democrats in control, what's going to happen with healthcare?
Well, here is, I think there's going to be a genuine debate, right? I mean, there are those of us who believe that we need to expand Medicare, and that's the right way of doing it. Others want to build on the Affordable Care Act and a public option. It's not that I'm opposed to a public option, but if you're going to have a public option where you're still going to have high deductibles, and you're still going to have high premiums, and you're still going to have copays, then people are going to go and they're not going to like that experience, and you're going to have the same challenge with public confidence. So I think one of the best ways that we can push and maybe get consensus is to say, let's extend Medicare. Biden's at 60. Maybe we can get him to 55. Lieberman, we would have had, by the way, Medicare extended to 55 if it weren't for one person in this country, and that's Joe Lieberman. He literally killed the extension of Medicare to 55 during the whole Affordable Care Act debate. So I think getting to an extension of Medicare 55-50. I can see that being a reasonable, achievable goal in a Biden administration.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this is going to take a little more work. This one. Is California going to get its Medicare for All bill through, or is that going to happen?
This is something I feel strongly about. Many of us, we even Gavin ran on it. He should pass it. I mean, and I have a bill that would allow a waiver. That would, people keep saying, well, Vermont didn't work. The reason Vermont didn't work is the federal government didn't give it the waivers that it needed. It couldn't use the Medicare and Medicaid money to create a single payer system. Well, how can you expect a state to have its Medicare, Medicaid obligations and also have single payer without getting that federal funds? So if we get the waiver, which I do think would pass under a Biden administration, then you could have a state like California or other states like Massachusetts, where there's a single payer movement, do that at a statewide level and show its success.
There are 3 cities that I know of now that are going to let 16-year-olds vote, at least on local or state issues in California. I believe San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland have passed their own legislation to do this. I've always been a fan of lowering the voting age. They're doing it now in many countries. Austria has done it. Scotland did it. Brazil. It's not a crazy idea, and it gets young people involved while they're in high school in what they're going to have to be doing. Their future is just 2 years away, and they're having no say from everything from, if we're being sent to war, they're going to fight the war, and they have no say in that lead up to the war. So I don't know. I've always liked the idea of doing this. I see other countries doing it, and I think, why don't we try it? And now parts of California are trying that.
Yes. And here's Ayanna Pressley, who's part of the squad, had a bill in the House to do this that quite a few people supported. And I think it can generate even more support. The best argument, I think, for doing it when someone is in high school is after high school, a lot of people leave their hometown. They either are going to college or they're getting some training or they've got a job somewhere else. And so your first experience when you become a registered voter is in a community where you never grew up and you never lived in. And so obviously it's probably people don't feel as connected to get up and vote. And it's, I think, one of the reasons that young voters' participation is so low.
Yeah.
Imagine if you were doing it at 16, where someone is a sophomore or junior in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and now you have as part of your high school class the obligation to register, reminders about voting. My guess is you would see that participation go through the roof, and people would be voting in their first election in a community that they felt connected to.
And in these countries where they've lowered the voting age to 16, the teachers do that. They bring the candidates in, they have debates, they have assemblies, they get kids really, really involved because they do get to have a say now. They get to tell the adults what to do at 16. And they've done this study where the countries that have lowered it to 16, just what you said, what they have found, comparing it to the countries where 18 is the voting age, the countries where it's 16, more of those citizens in their 20s show up to vote every year, every other year, than the countries where the voting age is 18, because they started them young. They started at 16 while they were in school. And like you said, part of a community. That the data is already in on that you will have a more engaged citizen if you start them in high school as opposed to after high school.
That's a great fact. I think we should share these studies with other members of Congress. But this is something that I think there's an increasing ability to get done, at least when you look at the 4-year term for Joe Biden. And there's a great admiration, a genuine admiration, respect for what young people have done in this country on climate change, on gun violence, on
the whole movement this summer.
Yeah.
After George Floyd's lynching, the whole movement was young people at the forefront.
They've really been ahead as a moral conscience on so many issues, whether it's police violence or climate change, and so I think that that's where the energy is coming from, and if they have the right to vote, that can only help move this country in a more just direction.
So you don't think I'm up here in some starry-eyed place floating above the earth when I think about California, and when I think about what we could learn from California and what our federal government would look like if we just didn't have to do battle with people who believe that the earth is just 6,000 years old. That just give us a breather here for a bit and let us try to fix some of this. I say this all the time when I run into people, conservative people stop me and I go, I don't like what you, I said, yeah, but look at it this way. If we do get free healthcare for everybody, we're going to cover you too, and when we don't go into that next stupid war, we're not sending your daughter or your son off to war. We're going to, you get the benefit from all these things. We're not just doing it like Republicans do for themselves. I'm going to get this tax bill passed so I don't have to pay taxes. This is the Democratic way, is everybody gets a loaf of bread. Everybody gets a fish. Everybody, and why?
Jim Clyburn's, we didn't even talk about this, but high-speed internet, rural broadband, that like we did in the New Deal with rural electrification, where everyone should be connected online so that they can have conversations like what we're having, that will end up benefiting rural red communities more. Here's the irony about Donald Trump, which I, for the life of me, don't understand why people don't see. The people who have done the best in Donald Trump's economy have been some of the corporations in my district. I mean, if you voted for Donald Trump because you wanted to see Silicon Valley make more money, you succeeded. I mean, Apple's now worth nearly $2 trillion. Google's doing great. Some of the New York funds are doing great. But if you are living in Ohio or Pennsylvania or in Kentucky or West Virginia, and you're thinking, well, what happened for my economy? The story is not the same. And the Democrats actually will be focused on the communities that have been left out. My pitch to them is not about some abstract conception of save American democracy and our constitutional values. My pitch is very direct. Most of the folks have been struggling. They think that government has not done anything to help their lives. They're struggling either to pay their rent, they're struggling with student debt, they're struggling because they don't make enough money to provide for their families. And I would say to them, our focus, once we have this opportunity, is going to be directly to make your life better. We're going to put more money in your pockets in terms of stimulus. We're going to fight like anything to get you health care so you don't have these premiums and copays. We're going to make sure that you don't have to bankrupt yourself to provide your kids with education or childcare. And I would say this is going to be a team effort. You have a lot of progressives in the House that are going to demand this, and hold us accountable. Hold us accountable. If you give us all three, two chambers in the White House, and we don't deliver in 2 years, you can hold me to it. You don't have to come out again if you don't see your life improving. But I am confident that that we are going to be able to do this in a material way where your life is going to get better in the way it deserves.
Wow, well put. I really want to thank you for being on my podcast here and helping to explain the California vision of how we could all be participating in that. And I want to thank actually anybody listening to this who lives in California, who's participated politically in this last decade or so of not only turning California around, but coming up with all these wonderful ideas to make not only California great, but ones that we need to, I think, adopt and make America, California great. I think we could all benefit for that. So the Californians listening, thank you. Thank you very much, Ro Khanna, Congressman from the 17th District in California, the Congressman from Cupertino. I've just given you the title.
There you go.
Thank you for what you've done and being with us here.
Very powerful, Michael. Thank you.
Wow. So that was a great conversation with Congressman Ro Khanna from California. And as you heard, what if we were all California? I don't mean just the good weather or your house on fire. I don't mean those things. Okay. I'm talking about what if we succeed in Georgia here at the beginning of January? My friends, we can do this. People of Georgia, you can do it. People listen to this who have a friend or family member or classmate, former classmate in Georgia that you can call, encourage them to get involved. I'm going to tell you some things right now. So you might want to write this down or you can listen to it again, or I'll post it right here on the podcast site. So because these are very important dates that are coming up. And our success in Georgia is going to depend on a number of you making this happen. So here's what you've got to do. All right. First of all, these are the key dates to remember regarding the Georgia Senate runoff election. Number one, voting registration. You must be a registered voter. If you're already registered there, don't worry about it. You're registered. If you haven't registered and you live there, December 7th is the voter registration deadline. Monday, December 7th. You've got to get registered by then. And remember, you can go online. You can go in person to your city clerk, county clerk, office, whatever. So right here on my podcast page, there's a link you can go to. It'll take you right to the government page, the state of Georgia, where you can register right now. Okay? Now, they have early voting even for a special runoff in Georgia. They have early in-person voting. That begins a week later on Monday, December 14th. So that's the smart thing to do. Show up early and vote. That's what people did all across Georgia for this election. Look how well that turned out. So early voting begins Monday, December 14th and goes for 3 weeks, right up to the day before the election on December 4th. So vote early. That's a great thing. And you may have to go on the site there to find out, where your polling place is. I can't guarantee it's the same place you vote in the general election. So make sure you just don't get tripped up by that. And then election day is Tuesday, January 5th. That is the day. That is the day Georgia can save this country. Can we take 2 more years of Republicans? Well, they won't be ruling the country, but they will block every good thing that Biden and Harris need to do to save people's lives with this pandemic and all the other work that needs to get started. So, who are the 2 Democrats that are running? The Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, and he's running against Senator Kelly Loeffler. And the other Democrat is Jon Ossoff, and he is running against current Senator David Perdue, one of the most corrupt people in the United States Senate. So you're voting for Warnock against Loeffler, and you're voting for Ossoff against Perdue. Let me also remind you that you're a registered voter, and you may want to vote early, but you don't want to go stand in line. You can't. You're not well. You're old. It doesn't matter. I don't think you have to have a reason there. Just request an absentee ballot and do it now so you get it and you get it back in time. I've got links to all this on the podcast description page here, wherever you're listening to me, whether it's on Apple or Anchor, Spotify, Stitcher, Radio Public, whatever. Just go down, look for this, click on it. And a reminder to 17-year-olds, if you're 18 on or before January 5th, you can register right now. You don't have to wait. You can register at 17 years old. You can vote early, beginning on December 14th, while you're still 17, because you're going to be 18 on the official election day. You'll be 18 by then. So, man, get involved. Right now, you're a senior in high school, 17 years old. What a great historic election for that to be your first election. Now, listen, to everybody who doesn't live in Georgia, I want to encourage you to follow Stacey Abrams groups that are on the ground in Georgia. Get involved with them, support them. They've got things for you to do. You can send them money. All of that is needed. The groups are Fair Fight Action, and the New Georgia Project. And again, I've got links, I say, to all of this right here on this page. So please click on one of these links. Please get involved. We have no choice, my friends. Look at what has been going on here. I mean, this has been more insanity after the people of America have spoken in such large numbers. Goodbye, Don. He doesn't want to leave. Well, we knew this was going to happen. He doesn't want to leave. He won't leave. He's mucking around with the vote. He's got Giuliani running all over the place. And yes, it's funny watching the black drip from his hair. I guess what? The New York Times said it wasn't hair dye that was running down his face. I knew that. I could see right away that it was a leak in his brain that was coming down the side of his head onto his cheek. If you know anything about brain fluid, that was serious brain fluid coming out. You've heard of the term brain fart, right? Okay, well, that's essentially what happened there. Giuliani had a brain fart, and I don't want to get too gross here, but you know how certain farts can be. Let's just say there could be a dry fart and there could be the other kind. And I think that he had the other kind coming right out of his brain and popped right up, popped right through his skin. And that was serious brain juice. I hope somebody there got a cup or something or grabbed the tissue that he was using to wipe it, because that is some serious DNA that has got to be studied by scientists in the years to come. It's the next best thing to actually having preserved his brain for later study. The brain juice, just as good. So listen, all kidding aside, he's trying to figure out how to do a coup. And we can't just sit back and laugh at it. They have to know that we will be in the streets faster than you can say, faster than a Democrat can say, no, don't take to the streets. But we will. You will. I will. We'll all be there. So let's be ready. Let's be on guard. Eyes wide open. Whatever's going on isn't good. The evil genius is at work. And people continue to die. We hit the 250,000 mark this week. 250,000 dead. I don't know. I've got a lot to say about this, but I don't want to say it right now because we've got work to do. And I'm inspired by things that Ro Khanna told us about the state of California. And damn it, why can't we be like them? Why can't we have what they have? We're all Americans. But good ideas often come from the state of California, and we should pay attention to it. So thank you, Californians, for fighting for these things over the years. I know people may laugh at you sometimes, but your craziness is good crazy, and it's going to help the country a great deal. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. This is Michael Moore. Thank you to our executive producer, Basil Hamden, our editor and sound engineer, Nick Quaz, and to all of you for participating in this vast, crazy, wonderful movement that we're all a part of right now. The work is not done. I'm Michael Moore, and this is Rumble.
All the leaves are brown.